Then you go to chapter 20, verse 42. And you shall know that I am the Lord. God says, I'll tell you what, you're going to know who I am by the fact that I'll keep my promise when I shall bring you into the what, folks? Land of Israel. How many know that's been fulfilled? In 2,600 years, that promise lay dormant. Matter of fact, most prophecy teachers before the turn of the century, before the 1900s, said all this is all spiritual. There's no way that God could ever bring the people back. Now, there was a handful that believed in literal interpretation of the Word of God. And today we have what's called replacement theology, which is a theology that says the church has completely replaced Israel and that Israel is out of the picture. And yet, folks, that is one of the biggest heresies known to man. God is not spiritualized in what he said he's going to literally do. Now, listen to this. The Bible tells us that Israel would be born in a day. You say, what do you mean? Well, let me read to you the passage. This is Isaiah 66, verse 7. He starts off by giving a bizarre illustration. And any mother that's had a baby will understand how bizarre this is. Before she travailed, she brought forth. Before her pain came, she was delivered of a man-child. Who hath heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? It doesn't make sense. That don't happen. Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day? Or shall a nation be born at once? In other words, you go out and you plant your seed, or you go out the next morning and there's this full-grown ear of corn hanging, or a tree, a full-grown tree with fruit hanging on? No. And yet, he's saying something's going to take place. A nation's going to be born at once. Listen to this. During a 24-hour span of time, a United Nations mandate expired, ending the British control of the land of Palestine, and Israel declared its independence. During that same day, the United States issued a statement recognizing Israel's sovereignty, and its independence was acknowledged by other nations. Now this, again, after 2,900 years of Old Testament prophecies saying that this would happen from all these great old prophets. And yet, listen to this. This all literally happened in a single 24-hour day. Now, there's some people that are living here right now, or they're sitting here right now, that were alive and saw this happen. If you're in your 60s, that would have been 60 years ago this year. If you're in your 60s or older, you saw this happen. Did you know that? No, Paul didn't know that. Paul didn't see this happen. Martin Luther didn't see this happen. John Wesley and D.L. Moody and all the great, you know what? They all prophesied because they read the Bible, said it would happen. And it sure enough has happened. Now, folks, listen to this. That set things in place unlike any other issue. Once this came to pass, the motion of prophecy is now begun that is not going to stop till all things are fulfilled, Jesus said. And it's very interesting what has transpired since 1948 that's undoubtedly proven that. And we'll touch on it a little bit in just a moment. But listen to this. Only within a few hours of Israel's declaration of independence in 1948, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon, anybody ever heard of them names before? Invaded Israel. The combined population of those countries was at least 80 million. And Israel had less than 600,000. The Israeli army did not even have a single tank. Their enemy had 2,000 tanks. Israel, with only about 60,000 ill-trained and ill-equipped Israeli soldiers, and now folks, we're just talking within hours of their declaring their independence. And they crushed an army of 600,000. That's a ratio of 1 to 10. Now remember that. And they were able to not just do that, but they were able to gain 50% more land as a result of that war. That was called the War of Independence. Well, did you know that Moses said this in Leviticus 26 about Israel? You shall chase your enemies, they shall fall before you by the sword, and 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight. And your enemies shall fall before you by the sword. How many know to this very day the miraculous wars that have taken place with Israel, miraculously they have survived? I mean, we all think of the 6-day war, which was a miracle, a literal miracle. And yet, folks, here's the thing. We're watching this take place before our eyes, and yet we cannot see it. It's almost like it's so in our face, and yet, sad to say, people are too busy with their own little world to understand that God is saying, pay attention. This is a proof to you that I am God. Now, here's what I want to do. I want to take another passage from the book of Isaiah. Is everybody still with me this morning? And I want you to look at this passage, how it's written, and the detail that God has given. This 2,700-year-old prophecy. Isaiah 43. Let's start at verse 5. Fear not, for I am with thee. I will bring thy seed from the east. Now notice the order. That's not a coincidence. It's a direct proof that God knows what he's talking about. I will bring thy seed from the east, gather thee from the west, will say to the north, give up, to the south, keep not back. Now, you know that this is a classic example how replacement theology songs will try to take a verse like that and rewrite it and say it's for us to go around and claim souls in the church. But brother, listen to this verse, read it in its context and try to make it say that. You can't do it. This is about Israel. I will say to the north, give up, to the south, keep not back. Bring my sons from far and my daughters from the end of the earth. And just as Isaiah prophesied, Israel went into exile. That is exactly what he said would happen. And this is what ended up being the worldwide scattering of the Jews around the world, okay? But Isaiah went on to say that they would return to their homeland. And he gave them in directions, from the east, from the west, from the north, and from the south, in that order. Well, during the past century, millions of Jews have done just that. Let me give you an example. It starts off and it says from the east. Now, this is historical now. Now we're reading history to prove that God knows history from the beginning. Many Jews living in the Middle East countries moved to Israel during the 1900s. After Israel reclaimed independence in 1948, even more Jews moved from the to their ancient homeland after being forced out of various Arab countries in which they were living for centuries. Then it says from the west. And sure enough, during the early to mid-1900s, hundreds of thousands of Jews living in the West, which were the European countries, began moving to Israel to escape various persecutions, most notably the Holocaust in Nazi Germany. Then it says from the north, this is an amazing one, nearly 1 million Soviet Jews living in the former Soviet Union moved to Israel since the 1980s, after the fall of the Iron Curtain. Did you know, folks, that the Iron Curtain falling had to happen to get these Jews out and to get the gospel in? By the way, we've not heard the last from Russia yet. We'll talk some more about that in a little bit. And then it says from the south. During the 1980s and the 1990s, Israel, now listen to this, struck a deal with the Ethiopian communist government to allow the Jews of Ethiopia to move to Israel. Give you a perfect example. On one weekend of May the 21st, 91, Operation Solomon. Now think about this. This is pretty much during most of our all's lifetime.